Grab your pitchforks and rotten fruit. You're entering the show that encourages dangerous discussions with God's holy book. I'm your host, Ryan White, and this is Conversations with the Bible. Welcome, everyone, to another Conversations with the Bible. This week we are discussing Revelation, the book of Revelation, hope or horror. This is one I know I've had a lot of people very interested in this subject. This is one I'll be honest, I've been a little bit scared to put out, but we're going to have a great time on this show. We're going to talk about some things that hopefully from some perspectives that you haven't thought about. And, to be honest with you, some of you guys are going to grab your pitchforks on this show, but hopefully this will bring hope to some of you who have not liked the book of Revelation before. So, the book of Revelation, this is a book that is realistically unlike any other book in the Bible. Not for the normal reasons you would think. It's not because it is fundamentally different, that it doesn't deserve to be in the Bible or something like that. The issue with this book is that this book tends to either bring out extreme excitement in people or horror to some people, if you will, maybe. Maybe not horror, but at least extreme disinterest. And the issue is, unfortunately, is not really what the book actually contains, so much as what people do with the book. Of course, everyone knows the predictions that come out with it. 88 reasons for the rapture in 1988, 89 reasons for the rapture in 1989, Y2K, the Herald Camping of May 21st, 2011, Judgment Day, the Bible guarantees it. I'm looking at a picture of a billboard right now that someone spent a lot of money to put up in their hometown or wherever, saying that the Bible guarantees it. It guarantees Judgment Day, May 21st, 2011. Now, of course, the time I'm recording this is in the month of July, not in 2011, but in 2018, when we are very clearly past Mr. Camping's date prediction, and clearly nothing has happened. There has been no Judgment Day. There has been no rapture, to my knowledge, unless I missed it. I was possibly left behind. I don't know. But I'm going to go with it didn't happen. Neither did it happen in any of these other dates. And so the thing is that people, a lot of us have at some point in time in our past, have got caught up and got excited about these dates. And I'll be honest, I was there. I was looking at stuff. Now, at the time, I was going to college, and I was very poor, so I didn't really have any money to spend. Kind of thank God, on my, 10,000 pounds of beans and my end-of-the-world survival camping gear and all of this stuff. I didn't have the money to spend on this, but many people have spent a lot of money in hopes that, that they'll be able to survive the end times. And when these predictions fail, it tends to leave us with a bad taste in our mouth. And, for myself, I got to the point where I didn't even want to study the book of Revelation, and I started, my work in ministry years ago, and I'll be honest, I really have never done a teaching on the book of Revelation. I've mentioned some stuff here and there, especially when it comes to the last couple chapters with the New Jerusalem and basically the kind of restoration of Eden theme that is there, and that I believe that is very important. But I have intentionally avoided most of the rest of the book of Revelation. And the reason is because there's so many predictions out there. There's so many crazy, crazy things. When it comes to the mark of the beast, right? How many wild interpretations of the mark of the beast have we heard? The one that always sticks in my mind is the monster soda can. And if you've ever seen it, it has like 3 slash marks from a claw on it. And the idea there was, well, those look like straight up and down lines, and there's 3 of them. And in Hebrew, the Vav is a straight up and down line, and so this must be Vav, 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 which is 666. And so if you drink Monster Energy Soda in order to stay awake at work during the night, you are under the control of the beast system. Right? And no, I can't buy that anymore. Actually, I never could buy that. That was well after Revelation had burnt a bad taste in my mouth, and any of those things like that. It was just like, no, I'm sorry. Not only is that completely absurd that the mark of the beast is a can of soda, but it is also improper understanding of what gematria is. And it was really interesting because I mentioned this to one of my friends. It might have been Dina Dye, but it might have been someone else. And they were telling me they actually know the person in Israel who actually designed this 3 slash mark thing that people came up with for the mark of the beast. And they said that is, that person was like, obviously I did not have that in mind. It is a representation of, an animal slash marks or whatever. So anyways, the point of all of this is that for a lot of people out there, Revelation has become a book that you just don't want to pick up. And for a lot of people, it's a book that excites them, and they're always on the next thing, and they're always looking at how does everything fit into place. How is Fox News and all the other news groups? How are they showing me how the book of Revelation is unfolding before my eyes? How is NASA's calculations? How is that informing me on the book of Revelation? And if you're one of those people who get excited about that, you're probably going to be one of the type of people who want to pick up some pitchforks and rotten fruit and chase me out of the studio here today. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to present to you a different way of reading the book, a different way of understanding the book that takes the book very seriously, but doesn't force you into looking at end-of-the-world predictions and things like that. So I'm going to just be very honest with you again. You may not enjoy the show, but it's a different perspective. It's a different way to read the book. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm completely willing to be wrong on this. I'm not willing to debate this because realistically debates don't ever go anywhere. It just becomes kind of an ego contest. But I'd love it if people like to get engaged in the subject and actually take this seriously. And I'm always looking for serious feedback on the issue. But if you just don't agree with the way that I'm going to be presenting the book of Revelation, I'm not interested in actually debating my view versus your view and such, so on and so forth. Because again, when Yeshua returns, he'll sort everything out. I want to start with reading a line from the end of the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 22, verse 7. And Yeshua says, "Behold, I am coming rapidly. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book." Who keeps it. And we know that in Hebrew, the concept of keeping is shamar. It's guarding and it is obeying. So the concept here is not blessed is the one who unlocks the mystery of this book. Blessed is the one who determines who the Antichrist is or sets the right timetable. But blessed is the one who obeys the words of the prophecy. And as we're going to be getting into in this, what's going to end up having to be a series, obedience of the words of the prophecy is again, it's not about predicting these things. It's not about decoding them. It's about obeying what the message is. And when we look at the whole of the message of the book of Revelation, it is not a revelation of the Antichrist. It is a revelation of Yeshua. And the book is basically presenting us with this. There is a lamb and there is a beast. To whom are you going to give your allegiance to? Are you going to give your allegiance to the beast and his beast system, who is ultimately controlled by the dragon, which is Satan? Or are you going to give your allegiance to the Lamb, who has been put in that position by God Most High himself? To whom does your allegiance belong? And to guard the words of the prophecy of this book, I'm going to propose to you, means to give your allegiance to the Lamb, to the one who is slain, to the one who is overcoming this world. Amen. So that is how I'm going to present that. That's kind of an overview of the book that I'm going to be presenting to you. Is a book about conflicting allegiances, and kind of go from there. So why do I believe that the book of Revelation is not intended to forecast the end times? We're going to start off with that. But actually, before we get there, I just want to give you guys a kind of an overview of what we're going to be doing here with this study on the book of Revelation. I put this out, I think it's been maybe 2 months now. It's been a while back. I had no intention of studying the book of Revelation, but I put out a call for question and response, or questions that people want me to respond to. And someone asked me this. They said, the end times, end time prophecy, who is the woman? Is there a rapture of some? If yes, who are those some that are raptured? Is that us, the believers in the Torah? Should believers in Yeshua and Torah followers do end time prep, like storing food? Will we be here? That's enough to get you started. LOL. And you all know that LOL means Lucifer is Lord. Or Lucifer our Lord. I don't know. I'm just joking there. Obviously, LOL is laughing out loud. Anyway, so someone asked me that question, Miss Nancy Rucker, and I want to personally thank you. You were, I believe, at that point in time, the hand of God telling me, Ryan, it is time for you to tackle this book that you have been intentionally avoiding, and God has been showing me the beauty of this book and how it is not a book of horror, but it is actually a book of hope. So thank you very much, Nancy, for that. I also had put out a request for help with purchasing resources. There was a lot of books that I want to put in the study. You guys know me. I love to present you with factual, documented information, historical information that will then guide us to better understanding this. And so there has been an amazing response. I think as of this time, I haven't checked it, but I think almost every single book on a list of like 15 or so books has been purchased for me. I know Miss Jennifer Anderson, I'm sorry if you didn't want me to call out your name, but thank you, ma'am. You have purchased many of those books, and I pray that the Father blesses you for helping out with that, and I hope that you get a blessing out of this this teaching here. We're starting off on the podcast. I'm probably going to do 2 or maybe 3 podcasts. It kind of depends kind of on how long stuff takes. And these 2 or 3 podcasts, these are going to be kind of an introduction to the book of Revelation. We're going to kind of go over some key concepts and stuff like that. And then what I'd like to do is bring several people on the show, and we're going to discuss the book of Revelation. I believe we're going to have Rico Cortez on, talk about the temple in the book of Revelation, and probably have Dina Dion and maybe a couple others. We'll see. But what I'd really like you, if you really actually enjoy the podcast and you don't want to kill me after hearing it, I would encourage you to continue or to consider joining the website. It's faithofmessiah.com. My intention there is we are going to do a series, and this will be on video, so you'll get to see some, a lot more visual stuff there. But we're going to do a series of videos culminating eventually in a chapter-by-chapter study of the book of Revelation. But before we start off on a chapter-by-chapter study, I want to lay a firm foundation of how do we actually study the book, how should we approach the book, what are the ways to approach the book, by the way. This is something that we don't always talk about, but there are actually different ways of reading the book of Revelation. And you may have actually heard of some of these. You know, you've got like preterists who basically believe that everything in the book of Revelation has already come to pass and that it really doesn't hold any real significance. And then there's futurists, which these are the type of people who believe that everything is future for us from today, and so they read it with that mindset. And the thing is that both groups are taking the Bible seriously. They're taking the Bible seriously, but they are coming to it with a different set of preconceived ideas, and based on those preconceived ideas and their understanding of what the book is about, what it's doing, is going to guide them on how they read it. And so I'm going to, and I will explain the viewpoint that I'm coming from. It's not one that you've probably ever heard of. This is why I had posted a while back about a new way to read the book of Revelation, because I'm not going to approach it from either a preterist or a futurist or a historicist point of view. I'm going to approach it from a different point of view here. But I am going to tell you, for my friends out there who are preterists or historicists or futurists, I love you guys. I understand that you guys are taking the Bible seriously, and I don't think that you're heretics for reading it the way that you do, so please don't consider me a heretic for reading the book from a different perspective. And, you know, maybe one of us is right, maybe all of us are right in our own ways. I don't know, but my point here is not to the entire goal of my podcast and of my teachings after this is not to prove you wrong so much as it is to show people that if they just don't like the preterist viewpoint or the futurist viewpoint, that there is another way. And my goal, my desire here is to take the people, and this is my ultimate goal for the whole purpose I'm recording this, is I want to take the people who have been uncomfortable with the book of Revelation, who've just decided to set it to the side because they just feel uncomfortable with the predictions and the doom and gloom and everything, all the different types of stuff out there, and I want to get them engaged and get them to enjoy the book, because maybe they don't like those perspectives, and maybe the perspective that's going to connect them is different. So I really wanted to throw those disclaimers out there, because I know I'm going to be stepping on toes here, and please don't take offense to that. Please don't think that I think anything less of anyone who disagrees with me. I think it's important that we have differing viewpoints. That is one of the biggest things that we've lost or began to lose in our education system today, is that they don't allow for differing viewpoints. We can't have both, a liberal and a conservative, a Republican and a Democrat. I tend to identify with one of those sets of groups there, but at the same time, I don't want everyone to be conservatives. I think we need to have differing viewpoints to balance things out. So this is just a different viewpoint. And let's go from there. So let's begin with why I do not believe that the book of Revelation is intended to forecast the end times. Okay, let's start off with, what is the book about? What is the book trying to do? And the book is trying to do this according to its own words. It is the revelation of Yeshua. It is not revealing the Antichrist. It's not revealing the end times. It's not revealing the beast. It does contain stuff about the end times. It does contain stuff about the beast. It contains a lot of stuff. But according to the way that John started out writing, it is not a revelation of those things, but it is a revelation of Yeshua. And so when we read the book of Revelation, our eyes should not be on the beast. Our eyes should not be on the horrible things that are being discussed, but our eyes should be on Yeshua. The point of this is not to tell us that bad things are going to happen, but that Yeshua is there with us when bad things happen. So, it is a revelation of Yeshua to. It is to people. It is to 7 churches. In the very beginning, verse 4, John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia. So this is not a letter to people in the future. This is not a letter to Christians. This is not a letter to Jews. This is not a letter to 21st century Americans. This is a letter, it is an epistolary letter to 7 churches that are in Asia. Now, I know there's been a lot of popular teaching in what is called dispensationalism. Say that with me, dispensationalism. Dispensationalism was created by necessity because of the rapture theory. The rapture theory was invented in around the year 1820, and I don't have the name of this. So this is where all of this stuff that I'm talking about. By the way, if you want to go more in depth, we're going to go more in depth on the website and the videos they'll be putting out here pretty soon. But this is, for the podcast, this is kind of an overview. So, we'll talk a little bit more about the rapture theory and why it's not correct. I'm just going to be straightforward. It's not correct. We're going to talk more about that on the website. We might go into that in future podcasts. But the rapture theory was invented around the year 1820. It may have been a couple years after 1820. But it basically said, okay, John wrote a letter to some people who were suffering intense persecution. They were being thrown to the lions. They were being crucified. They were being beheaded. They were just suffering. And so John decided he was going to write this letter of this future vision where he was basically saying, hey guys, I know that you're suffering, but guess what? In the future, sometime, 2,000 years later, there's going to be even worse suffering. But there's good news. The people who have attended enough rapture theory seminars and have believed in the correct timing, whether it's pre, post, or mid. The people who actually figured out the right timing of the rapture, they're going to be sucked up in the sky, and they're not going to actually have to suffer during the rapture. So, good news to you guys. I know that you guys are being fed to the lions, but while that lion is slowly pulling you into different parts, just think about how great it's going to be in the future when these people who went to this this rapture seminar, they're going to be sucked up in the sky, and they won't have to be torn apart by lions or eaten by locusts or any of these terrible things. Sorry, guys, that makes John a bit of a jerk in my book. I'm going to be honest with you. If that's what John was doing, if he was writing a letter to people who were suffering intense persecution, saying, guys, I know that you really don't care about this because you're fearing for your life, but I'm going to write you a letter about how in the future people are going to escape this type of persecution, that makes him a jerk. Okay, let's be honest. Let's be completely honest. Why would people preserve that type of a letter? If it had nothing to do with them, if it had no meaning to them, why would they preserve that type of a letter? And so the way that the way that the rapture theory had to overcome and become popular, because you take the rapture theory and then you go, well, wait a minute, John's writing a letter to 7 churches in Revelation, and so that makes him a little bit of a jerk, right? Because he's writing something that's irrelevant to them. And so what the rapture theory did is they created what's called dispensationalism. And this solves this problem of John, and it also solves the problem of, and we'll discuss this. This is one of the problems I've had with the book of Revelation, that the Yeshua of the Gospels deals with things fundamentally different than the Yeshua of the book of Revelation as is being interpreted by the rapture theory. You see, the Yeshua of the Gospels, he forgave his enemies. He endured suffering. He endured shame. He allowed himself to be crucified without retaliation. And the rapture theorist picture is this Yeshua of anger and destruction. And so that necessitates what's called dispensationalism. And dispensationalism basically says, okay, God deals with humanity in different ways during different dispensations. And then, by the way, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just giving you kind of a Wikipedia overview. This is not an area that I've studied, but this is how this is perceived. And dispensationalism and the rapture theory really caught on because basically the Scofield Study Bible was written with all of this sort of perspective in mind. And so a lot of people have grown up thinking that this is the only way that you can read the book of Revelation. The issue that I'm going to propose to you is that our God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Amen. And so the very idea of dispensationalism really just gets under my skin. The idea that the Yeshua of the Gospels is somehow different than the Yeshua of the book of Revelation just does not jive well with me. This also necessitates God himself dealing with people differently. And so what they've done is they said, okay, well, these 7 churches of Asia, these weren't real churches. These were actually 7 dispensations of the church era or of Israel. I don't know. I'm sure there's all sorts of different things out there. But I'm not here to disprove every theory out there. I'm here to tell you that that's not who God is. That's not the way that God is described to us in Scripture, as dealing with people in different ways and being a dispensational God. So I reject the idea of dispensationalism, straight up. So it is a revelation of Yeshua to the 7 churches in Asia Minor who are suffering intense persecution. And I would propose to you that as we read through the book of Revelation, every time you read through that, keep that image in your mind. It's not revealing the beast, it's revealing Yeshua. And it's a real letter written to 7 real churches who lived in Asia Minor, or who were suffering intense persecution. Other reasons I don't believe that the book of Revelation is intended to forecast the end times, number 2, is that it has never worked once. Not once. Not one single prediction of the rapture has come true. We are still here. We've got past 1988. We got past 1989. We got past Y2K. We got past 2011. And we got past the, 70 billion different ways of the world ending in 2017. That was the big year. It was like September 23rd or something like that. I mean, we had the blood moons. We had 70 years of Israel being a nation. We had everything. There was like solar eclipses and lunar eclipses and everything. I remember seeing all these videos and people had it worked out. Oh yeah, it was the Jubilee, right? We had everything worked out. We had our math down perfectly. And nothing happened. So let me ask you a question. Is that because that we forgot to carry the 1 to the next column when we were doing our calculation? Or is it possible that we've been reading the book of Revelation the wrong way? That the book of Revelation was not intended as a like a Tom Hardy or one of those Tom Hardy novel, or the what were those? I don't know if you remember those like choose your own adventure books where you read and then it's suddenly like if you choose this, go back to page 68. But if you like this, go to page 238, right? And you keep on going and you're like bouncing all over the book trying to work your way to the end. And that's what the way that we've been taught to read the book of Revelation. We've been taught, okay, well you start to read it, but then you got to jump back to the book of Daniel, and then you jump to Matthew 24, and then you jump here and there, and it puts forth this vision that God does not want to be straightforward with his people, that he wants us to have to go on like this treasure hunt and jump through all of these exegetical and eisegetical hoops in order to come up with a date, that he couldn't just tell us a date. I'm going to ask you a question. Why does God not tell us a date? I mean, even Yeshua himself said, I don't know the date. God has not revealed to me the date. Now, why would God not reveal the date to us? Can I propose to you that the reason why God does not tell us the future, nor, as I would propose, leave us the ability to predict the future, is that because people would do this. They would say, you know what? The world is ending September 10th of 2020, so that means I've got about 2 years to party, and then a couple months to clean myself up and get myself right with God, eh? That's the problem, is that if we knew when the end was coming, or at least when the countdown to the end was coming, that we would have, whether we intended it or not, we would create within ourselves a mindset of, well, I don't have to actually get myself right with God. I don't actually have to start loving my neighbor until the start of the 7-year tribulation or the 3.5-year tribulation. Yeshua himself, from Yeshua's own mouth in the book of Matthew, I believe it's the end of chapter 24 or possibly the beginning of chapter 25. I'm pretty sure it's the end of 24. Yeah. The end of 24, Yeshua tells us, he says, concerning the day or the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. And then he gives the reason why. And he gives the reason why like this. He says, he says this in chapter 24, verse 43, but know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. Therefore you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Ladies and gentlemen, if we read the words of Yeshua right there, he's telling us we're not going to be able to predict it. You're not going to be able to use NASA. You're not going to be able to use Islam or the United Nations or the Pope or anything like that. You're not going to be able to predict it. And the reason is because God wants you to always be prepared. What's the only way? And Rico, if you're listening to me right now, you know the answer. What's the only way to prepare for a thief breaking into your house? It's to always be ready from day one. It's to be ready right now. Think about this. Are you ready right now? If Yeshua came back right now, are you ready to stand in his presence? Are you ready to be judged right now? Is your heart ready? Are your actions ready? Have you done the things that you know you should have done? Have you forgiven the people that you know you should have forgiven? He speaks of a parable right after this, Matthew 25, of 10 virgins. They're waiting there for this wedding party to come in the night. What is the only way for them to be ready? It was because they were constantly vigilant. They were always ready. They didn't have to calculate out the master's return because they were always ready. And the foolish virgins, they thought that they would have warning. They thought that there would be some period of time where they would know that the bridegroom was coming and that they would have time to prepare. But they weren't ready because no one knows the day or the hour. No amount of studying the book of Revelation, studying the book of Matthew, studying the book of Daniel, comparing NASA charts, any of this stuff, nothing of that nature is going to help you, because we do not know the day or the hour. Now, it's very possible. I'm not saying there will be no tribulation period. It's very possible that there will be a tribulation period, but don't bet your life on it. Don't bet your eternal soul on it. Be ready now. Be ready this instant, because maybe we got all our calculations wrong. Maybe, just maybe, Yeshua could be coming back tomorrow or today even. Let's be a people who are those wise virgins who are constantly vigilant, who are constantly ready. Amen. Okay, I think we've kind of covered a lot there, and so let's kind of move on and let's talk a little bit more about this interpreting of the book of Revelation. It is the revelation of Yeshua to the 7 churches in Asia Minor who are suffering intense persecution. What does that mean? Why do I keep repeating that statement? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason is because they were suffering intense persecution. And John was writing a letter to them. Now, while this letter continues to carry significance for us today, its primary locus of significance lies in the 7 churches that he actually wrote the letter to. Those were 7 real churches. These were not dispensational ages. This is not some sort of code word that you've got to this is not 7 different denominations. I've heard that one, kind of thrown around there, like, oh, well, the Ephesus represents the Baptists, and Smyrna is the Pentecostals, and where's the one with the evil woman? That's Jezebel. Oh, Thyatira. That one's the Seventh-day Adventists because they follow Ellen White. I'm not kidding you. I've heard this sort of thing put forth before. And the thing is that none of it's true. These are not dispensations. These are not denominations. These are 7 real churches. Or assemblies, if that word makes you a little bit more comfortable. These are 7 real groups of believers in the 1st century AD, and when we actually read the letters being written to each of the churches, we can actually pick out why each letter has these certain things spoken to them. For example, we have, the church in Pergamum. I believe it is, yeah. Pergamum is, I'm trying to read through this, here he goes. The letter to the church in Pergamum. He says, yet you hold, this is verse 13, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, yet you hold fast to my name and do not deny my faith. Even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. Okay, let's stop there and let's analyze this, because this is a very important verse. Pergamum, real city. It's a real city. It really existed in Asia Minor. Now, the letter says, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. So was there a cult of Satan there? No. There was a very important cult there, but during that day and time, you could not mention that cult by name. Any guesses? That's right. It was the cult of Caesar, what is known as the imperial cult. The imperial cult is a fascinating subject to study. And if you have not studied it yet, I would propose that you do not read the book of Revelation again. Or not propose, I would suggest, should I say, that you do not read the book of Revelation again until you have studied what the imperial cult was and the significance of it. Imperial cult was the worship of Caesar as God. And Augustus Caesar, if you guys remember him, he used to be called Octavian. Then he won a war and he was called Augustus. He was a very powerful Caesar, and he was the first one who became deified. He was given godhood while he was still alive. And it was actually, interestingly enough, the city of Pergamum where, I'm not kidding you, the city of Pergamum, you can look this up, was the very first place where a temple was built not to honor but to worship Caesar as a god. Pergamum was the place where the very first temple to worship Caesar as God was built. After that happened, very rapidly after that, other cities fell in line and quickly either built temples or altars to the new god Caesar, and they started praying to him. They started singing songs to him. They started offering sacrifices to Caesar. By the time we hit the timing of the book of Revelation, around 95-ish AD, the imperial cult worship was the fastest growing religion in the Roman Empire. And it really all started at Pergamum. Now, if you're going to speak out against the empire, would you write, we hate the Romans are evil, and God will destroy the Romans? Would you write that on a piece of paper? No. The same thing. If you were over in North Korea right now, and you were trying to rally the people to resist Kim Jong-un, you wouldn't go around saying, resist North Korea, resist Kim Jong-un. You would create code words so that your literature, the people reading it, could understand it, but the people who it was against would look at it and go, okay, I don't really know what that means. You can keep it, right? We have plenty of examples of this. In Qumran community, if you remember them, they were the Essenes. He lived outside of Jerusalem, a little ways out in the Qumran community near the Dead Sea. They wrote about this, it was called the War Scroll, and they had this whole thing about how they were going to go to war with the Romans, except for they never call them the Romans. They call them the Kittim. The Kittim. They drew a word out of the Hebrew Bible. If you remember, there was a prophecy in Isaiah, I think it was, about the shores of the Kittim. These were seagoing people, and the Romans came to Israel oftentimes in a ship. So they called them the Kittim. After the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD, is very well documented. We have all sorts of apocryphal literature, Jewish literature from after 70 AD. Prior to 70 AD, Jewish literature never called Rome Babylon. But after 70 AD, almost consistently, Rome was always referred to as Babylon. So they took that imagery of the people who destroyed the first temple, and they transposed it onto the group of people who destroyed the second temple as a way of coding their literature, so that the Romans read it, they're like, oh, they're talking about the Babylonians, the Parthian Empire. We don't like those guys anyways. But in reality, right, they're actually speaking out against Rome, that every Jew understood the language of that day and time. This is what's called apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature. It's kind of like political cartoons. In America today, for those of you who are listening in the United States, you'll get this. If I told you that the donkey has a stinking, rotting corpse, right, and you understood that I was speaking about the Democratic Party, and it's going through. In fact, Jim Carrey, in my presentation when I presented this at Revive Conference this last weekend, I showed everyone a picture where Jim Carrey, who's a Democrat, has a picture very poorly drawn. He should stick to acting, even though, anyways. It's of this like donkey corpse that's painted with an American flag and it's rotting, and his caption was, "And let's not kid ourselves, rotting donkeys stink too." and then you put like at DNC, right? He's speaking about the Democratic Party, but rather than actually naming them, he uses this symbol that, as Americans, we understand that the donkey is associated with the Democratic Party. But, to be realistic, if you took this painting over to, to other countries, unless they understood American culture, they probably would have no idea what Jim Carrey was even doing here with this picture of a donkey painted with an American flag on its body. All right, it's just, you have to be within the culture to understand these symbols. And so this is what anyone in Jewish culture, or Christian culture, can we call them, they understood that you can't name Rome, and so you'd use symbolic names such as Babylon or Satan in order to do this. So when this letter is written to this church in Pergamum, where Satan's throne is, we shouldn't be going to the city of Pergamum and looking for, like digging underground to see if that's where, Satan's underground lair is or anything. No, that's referring to this temple that was built in order to give honor to Caesar as a god. And we understand that when we look at this culture. And so we see this, he says, and yet you hold fast to my name and do not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas. And you got to understand, in this day and time, everyone had to swear allegiance to Caesar as their Lord. They actually had to call him their Lord. And so it's a huge idea to hold fast to Yeshua's name and not deny your faith in him, as in the days of Antipas, a real person who was really killed because of his faith in Yeshua. This is not some sort of dispensational stuff. These are real people suffering real persecution in this real city that really had Satan, i.e. Caesar's, throne, as it was, the very first temple that was dedicated to him. And what's really interesting is that, all those other 6 churches, those other 6 cities that are named there, all of them had either temples or at least altars with priesthoods dedicated to the worship of Caesar. All 7 of these churches were huge center points of imperial cult worship. And I don't think, sometimes we don't really grasp, it's not just worshiping Caesar, it's worshiping him out of gratitude. It's saying, you know what, you've done so much for me, Caesar. You've brought peace to the empire by stopping the civil war. You have captured and destroyed all the barbarians by going and conquering other foreign lands. You've built infrastructure and roads and commerce and all this wonderful stuff. And as my gratitude to you, I'm going to worship you as my God. And the imperial cult pantheon, which would include Caesar, it would include the goddess Roma, who represented Rome. It would include Nike for victory, and there was one other one that's eluding my name right now. And so this was this kind of pantheon of gods, but it was ultimately giving worship to the beast system, which was the Empire of Rome. It was the worship of government. The worship of government is what was going on in the first century. And this is what people are being called to resist. These people, we got to realize that if they did not submit to this system, they would find themselves more often than not dying. And the sad thing was that it wasn't actually even the Roman soldiers, the Roman army necessarily, that had to do this persecution. You see, these 7 cities in Asia Minor, they actually didn't even have standing armies in the cities. Why? See, they would have a like a legion posted in Judea, or at least a large amount of soldiers, right? But in cities like Ephesus and Pergamum and Thyatira, Smyrna, they didn't have to have soldiers. Why is that? because of imperial cult worship. You would never think about revolting against your God. And so, it was through the worship of the government, the worship of imperial cult, that they controlled the province. And we've got to understand, in that day and time, the way that they thought of their gods was that it was okay to worship other gods. I mean, if you guys want to worship the Jewish God, hey, that's great. If you guys want to worship, this God or that God, that's great. Bring him into the pantheon. What became a problem is when you gave sole allegiance to a single God and rejected all others as gods. In fact, they had a word for those types of people. They called them atheists. No joke. No joke. They were atheists because they denied the gods, plural, right? They were atheists. And so what would happen? Well, they believed that in order for you to have peace and security and blessing, you had to keep the gods happy. Now, let's say that you've been working all your life keeping the god Caesar and the god Roma and the god Nike and the other god whose name is slipping my mind right now. You've worked your entire life, sacrificing to them, worshiping them, throwing parties for them, all of these wonderful things, and you've kept these gods happy your entire life, but suddenly you notice that your neighbor, who had been doing the same thing as you, all of a sudden stops going to these official functions. And he stops offering sacrifices, and he stops doing this, that, and the other, and then you come home and maybe your grain harvest wasn't as good that year. Who are you going to blame? Well, you're going to blame that guy next door. That's how they understood things, that calamities happened because they had not offered proper worship to their gods. And as a community, when the community failed to worship that God properly, that was a huge issue. And so it wasn't the Roman government who was persecuting the believers in Yeshua. It was the Roman citizens. It was their neighbors. It was their friends. It was their family who were persecuting them, who were turning them into the authorities. And the authorities at that point in time, they'd be like, okay, well, either you worship Caesar or we're going to throw you to the lions. But they weren't actively seeking them out. It was their own neighbors, their best friends, who were turning them in because this is disrupting society. You're going to make the gods angry if you do not conform to the system. And this is why it was especially dangerous for people who had come, who were from formerly pagan backgrounds, who had come to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through Yeshua, and they had been, their neighbors look at them, they're like, you know what, guys, you've been worshiping these gods your entire life, and now suddenly you change? We're not going to have it. Think about this. How many of you come from a background where you kept Christmas and you ate pork? And now you have come out of that way of living. You have chosen to observe the biblical festivals rather than Christmas, and you've chosen to keep God's dietary laws rather than America's dietary laws, or whatever dietary laws of the nation that you live in. By the way, America has dietary laws. Go try selling dog meat. No, that's unkosher according to American dietary laws. Anyways, think about this. How many of you have come into that system, and then when you go over to your friend's house or to your relative's house, or maybe even to your own house, and maybe even your spouse, and suddenly you just pass the pork. You don't even say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat this terrible food." I'm just not going to eat this. And what happens? Like, every single eye suddenly is like drawn to you. Like, what are you doing? What are you? No. You take that pork and you put it on your plate now. No. You put the pork on the plate, right? Or you say, you know what? I'm going to come and visit you guys. We're going to fly out. We're going to spend like 2 weeks with you, and but on December 25th, we're going to go out to a movie and Chinese food, and not pork. And you suddenly you say, you know what, I don't want to participate in the Christmas celebration. And it doesn't matter that, like, you flew out 2 weeks and you've spent all of this time with this. You spent all of this time with your family. The fact that you're not keeping Christmas with them, the fact that you're not eating pork, suddenly becomes this point where they're trying to force you to do it. They don't like change. Now consider that scenario and put it where it's not just we don't like change, but the gods are going to be mad at us if you don't keep Christmas. Santa Claus is going to come and rain down fire and brimstone from the North Pole if you guys don't show up for Christmas. And if you guys refuse to, we're going to take you to the the elfin authority, and they're going to throw you to the toy lions. Or some, do you get what I'm saying? This was the persecution that they were facing. It wasn't just about just avoid the police, look the other way. It wasn't like that. It was you go to work and people know. You go out into the market to buy something. Well, when you go to buy something, there's this little altar where you're supposed to offer your allegiance to Caesar before you start purchasing stuff in the marketplace. What do? These people are suffering, and they're facing this type of persecution that you and I, in all honesty, I don't think that we can even conceive of how terrifying it is. When we think about persecution, we're like, oh, I got a flat tire the other day, and it was like 90 degrees out, and I had to get under my car, and it was terrible. I mean, the worst persecution that we have seen in America to this date is a couple was sued because they refused to bake a cake for a homosexual couple. And while I'm not trying to denigrate that situation, that is, in my opinion, that is a complete violation of the government's authority, and that is something that we should stand up for, that we should stand up against and say, you know what, we the people have a right to choose. If we don't want to support it's one thing to refuse people, but to refuse, it wasn't even just this baker had been serving homosexual people. It was just that he didn't want to bake a cake specifically for a homosexual wedding, right? But anyways, you realize that's really the worst that we as Americans, and I know that there's people out there who are from other countries, and I'm sure some of you guys actually it's starting to get bad. I mean, I look on the news and I'm scared for what's going on in Europe. It's increasingly bad. But even what's going on in Europe doesn't touch it. I mean, if you want to get somewhere similar, you can look at like North Korea. North Korea, a country that used to have over 50% of its population used to be Christian. And now today, less than 1% of the population is Christian. That is the type of persecution we're talking about. And I'm going to propose to you, we're getting near to the end here, we're quickly running out of time. I'm going to propose to you that the book of Revelation is not forecasting something that's going to happen 2,000 years from now, at a time when suddenly these believers are going to, suffer intense persecution. It is written to a people who are actually suffering real persecution. They're actually suffering it right then and there. And the book of Revelation is written to give them hope. It's a letter to give them hope, to persevere. It's a letter written to say, do not worship the beast. We know things are going to get bad. We know things it's just going to get worse, and that you may end up losing your life, but worship the Lamb, because as the book of Revelation shows us, that in the end, the Lamb wins. Yeshua wins. And someday in the future, Yeshua will return to the earth. The book of Revelation is very clear on that. very clear. There is that future revelation of Yeshua returning and raising us up from the dead, vindicating. By the way, the resurrection is a legal sort of thing. It is a way of vindicating those who have been unjustly put to death or died unjustly. It's all about vindication. And so the book of Revelation ends with that promise of hope that regardless of all the bad things that Caesar will do to you in this life, our God and his Messiah, Yeshua, will be faithful and true, and they will resurrect you. Amen. I want to end on a quick note here. I told you guys I wanted to talk about the 4 ways of interpreting Revelation. So I'm just going to read through really quickly. This is from the book Revelation, a shorter commentary by G.K. Beale. And by shorter commentary, he means it's only 650 pages, rather than his other commentary, no joke, that is like well over 1,000 pages. And I have them both. I'm probably only going to read the shorter commentary. But he goes through the 4 ways of interpreting Revelation throughout the history of interpretation. The first one is the preterist view. It refers to the past. It holds Revelation as a prophecy about the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. and that everything in the book has been fulfilled. Hence, it's all in the past. The historicist view has the view suggesting that that the seals and the trumpets and the bowls all paint a picture of successive ages of the church, and that basically the book of Revelation is kind of painting a picture of life over the past 2,000 years for us, right? And that as we stand right now, almost all of the book of Revelation has been fulfilled. And so there's that view. And then there is the futurist view, and there's probably other views too. These are the ones that G.K. Beale points out. These are the 4 big ones, or at least the 3 big ones, and then the extra one that he throws on at the end. And that's where I'm trying to get to. But there's this futurist view, and this is where it interprets the visions in a hyper-literal sense, and we'll talk more about this in the next time we meet, about hyper-literalism. And it basically requires this kind of dispensationalist view, and basically says that everything in the book is about the events leading up to the return of Christ and the return of Yeshua. And so basically everything outside of maybe 1 or 2 things in the book of Revelation is all future to us today, living in the year 2000. So those are kind of the 3 major views. And then there's a 4th view that he puts forward, which is the viewpoint that he takes on, and it is the one that I am going to teach from as well, because and I'm going to in the next episode just I will explain more about why I am choosing this view, but just really quickly, I'm choosing this view from the point of none of our predictions have come true. Number 2, the book was a real letter written to real people that had real meaning to the people that John was writing the letter to. And number 3 is that the more I've studied the Gospels, the more I've studied the Yeshua of the Gospels, the less I can have these 2 images of Yeshua matching up. And so either I have to take a dispensationalist view that the Yeshua of the Gospels is fundamentally different than the Yeshua of the book of Revelation, or I have to adjust my view of what the book of Revelation is actually talking about. And so I have personally chosen to adjust my view. And so here is what G.K. Beale calls the redemptive historical idealist view. Boy, is that not a mouthful. He starts off with the idealist view, views the entire book as a symbolic presentation of the battle between good and evil. The seals and the bowls and the trumpets speak over and over again to the events of human history in every age, and give believers of all ages an exhortation to remain faithful in the face of suffering. G.K. Beale believes that this view is substantially correct, but must be modified in light of the fact that parts of Revelation do definitely refer to future end times events concerning the return of Christ, his final defeat of the enemy, and thus the establishment of his heavenly kingdom. Many of the events prophesied speak equally to the life of the church in all generations, excluding those particular events dealing with the very end of history and the return of Christ, i.e. basically the last couple chapters, right? Preterists and historicists are to some extent correct in the understanding that various parts of John's vision find a measure of fulfillment in actual historical events. The fact is, however, is that their meaning is not linked exclusively to these particular events, for Revelation finds fulfillment in countless events throughout the church age. As such, the message of the letter is of relevance and value to all believers of all ages, which is why the vision was given to John. We might call this an eclectic, redemptive, historical idealist view, right? He's got to throw in all these big words. While the focus is on a symbolic presentation of the battle between good and evil, and on specific, repeated historical events during the church age. Aspects of preterist, historicist, and futurist views are all incorporated, hence eclectic. As we unfold the outline of the book, the reasons why we adopt this view will become apparent. So, basically, to summarize all of that, is that the bowls, the seals, and the trumpets, the things that are being described there, they certainly do match up with what we know is going on in the first century. And so, their meaning they give meaning to those particular events that we find in history in the first century. However, that meaning is not exhausted by those events. That meaning is not exhausted by those events. And that would explain why, for thousands of years now, people have been going, we must be in the end times, because what's going on in current world history matches up to this part of Revelation and that part of Revelation. Well, that is, according to this view, and this is the view that I love. I'll be honest with you, I love it. It makes the most sense for me, and it gives real power to the book of Revelation. The reason why throughout, for the last really 2,000 years, people have been reading the book of Revelation going, aha, this is speaking to me, and I see this current event as being foretold here in the book of Revelation, is not because the book of Revelation was speaking of one single historical event. Rather, it was describing what happens when the forces of good and evil collide, when the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of darkness come into conflict with each other, and that has been going on repeatedly over the past 2,000 years. And so the book of Revelation, at least the seals, the bowls, and the trumpets, is largely speaking to a generalized understanding of this is what happens when good and evil fight. And we're going to see that. We've seen that in the past, we see that in the present, and we're going to see that in the future until that day and hour which no one knows but the Father comes, when Yeshua comes back and restores all things, restores Eden, and restores the concept of the New Jerusalem to this earth, that the kingdom of heaven comes in its fullness. And so what I would propose to you is that the book of Revelation is something that has had significance in the past, has significance today, has significance for our future. But its significance is not in predicting these things, but rather in giving us hope, giving us encouragement to resist the beast, to resist the empire, to resist the worship of government, to stay true to the Lamb who was slaughtered, to stay true to the Yeshua of the Gospels, the one who had compassion on the people, the one who forgave his enemies, who loved his enemies, who was willing to live and die on our behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, we are called to live and to die if necessary for Yeshua, for the kingdom, for the people of the kingdom. We are called to be a light to the nations, to show the nations the true nature of the beast, to show the nations the true nature of every beast system that has existed for the past 2,000 years, to show them that it is the Lamb who will win in the end. Amen. God bless you all. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will be back in another podcast soon. Shalom, everyone.